Hello and welcome to Upgrade Thought. Today I'll be talking with my good friend Ramsey Brown. Ramsey has recently started a YouTube channel discussing topics related to psychology and self-improvement. Today we discuss comparing oneself to others, delayed gratification, what religion has to do with working out, how Ramsey records his YouTube videos, which by the way are like 20 to 30 minutes long, with no notes, what movies can teach us about self-improvement, a new metric of intelligence, being more present, mindfulness, flow, Jordan Peterson, and much, much more. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
First of all, thanks for hopping on, brother.
Yes, sir.
So, what is self-improvement in your words? What comes to mind when you hear the words self-improvement?
Uh, I think of, well, I think of myself, but I think of someone who is making incremental changes to better themselves in some sense. Like, not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be, in the gym or whatever, the gym bro, or maybe Hamza would always say, right? It's like just anything to improve yourself. It's like what Peterson says about putting the fork besides the plate and the knife besides the fork. Like, it's just the smallest step you can take to improve yourself in whatever capacity at whatever time frame, just day after day, month after month, week after week, and also comparing yourself to you and only yourself, not comparing yourself to somebody else in the same time frame, because comparison, I mean, they say comparison is the thief of joy, right? But it's also just, not only is it the thief of joy, but it's also the thief of pride, right? And improvement. So it's like, all right, I've improved, but this guy also improved, and he's improved, exponentially, and I've improved, in a linear fashion. So, he's up here and, I'm just going there. And it's like, oh, well, I'm not there yet. And then you're still looking up at him and you're like, wow, I have a, long ways to go, but you've still improved yourself. So you want to just keep improving yourself incrementally.
Yeah, is that a struggle for you to not compare yourself to other people
Yeah.
so much, or
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I would say that I definitely have uh, judged judged myself based on how I judge other people, because everything that's like, what you think of others will kind of be how others think of you. It's like, this paradoxical relationship, or really
Hmm,
actually not paradoxical, because it's exactly what you're thinking and it's coming right back to you. So, like, I've judged a lot of people based on their appearance. I remember last year I would literally be like, if I met someone and they didn't go to the gym, I would literally be like, "What are you doing with your life?" And that's kind of crazy, because, like, not everyone is, I mean, I think it's a generally good thing to go to the gym, but not everyone does, and that's their prerogative. It's like, you don't need to, judge them off that. And then if you judge other people on their appearance like that, you're going to judge yourself so harshly. And I've done that a lot in terms of, like, just judging myself harshly on appearances, which is good in the sense that I'm very disciplined with it, but it's also bad in the sense that it's very consuming of my mental state, when really it shouldn't be the only thing that is on your mind. And that's just one
hmm.
example of having a hard time with not comparing yourself to others. But really, if you just compare yourself to who you were yesterday, and you incrementally do that to what you actually know is good for you in the long run, then you'll be fine.
Yeah. No, it definitely is hard for me to relinquish my sense of wanting to compare myself to other people, though, because it feels like that's how society, like, if I'm applying for a job with 100 other people, like, I'm gonna be compared to those other 100 people, which makes it so hard to kind of personally step out of that space of competing with other people and just remember that, yeah, maybe other people will view me in comparison to others, but I need to view myself in comparison to the person that I was yesterday, because
Mhm.
that's the person who's had the same advantages and disadvantages as me. It's the most fair comparison. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's the only, like, negative control group that you can have of yourself, right? Because in an experiment, like, you have the positive control group, which is like the experimental group, And then you have a negative control group, which is the group that has all the same conditions as the positive experimental group, except they don't get the actual, like, let's say they're testing a drug. They don't get the drug, right? So they don't get whatever they're testing. So the only person in the whole entire world that has all your advantages and disadvantages at the exact same moment in time as you is you. Like, I don't care. There's 8 billion people, but that's, you can, if you're accounting for culture, you're accounting for, like, affluence, you're accounting for everything, then it's only really you. So there's no one else to compare to. But what you're pointing out in terms of, like, the job opportunity thing, it's a good point, because we live in, humans are hierarchical. So, and actually every animal is hierarchical. So, like, if you have 100 people competing for the job, of course you're competing against them for the job, which is a higher spot in, like, the status hierarchy, right? But you shouldn't you shouldn't consciously compare yourself to them, even though you are being compared to them by somebody else. But if you don't compare yourself to them and you're confident in yourself and you keep moving against yourself, then I think you'd have a higher chance of attaining that goal or that job than the person who's constantly looking over his shoulder. It's like when you're running a race and you're running, like, the 100-meter dash. Or, I don't run, but you're doing a 100-meter dash, and you're looking over your shoulder at the next person. Like, you're in front, but then you look over your shoulder, you're going to slow down and they're going to speed up because they're not looking at you. They're just focusing on themselves, right? So I think that's a parallel you can draw.
It's such an interesting paradox, because the person who spends less, it seems like you're saying the person who spends less time focusing on others ends up beating others at a higher rate and at a more successful rate than the person who spends more time thinking about others and less about themselves, you know?
Yes. Yeah. The person who spends less time thinking about others, more about themselves, is succeeding more. Yes, but I also would say that it is a fine line between thinking solely about yourself, and, like, being, like, super not narcissistic in that sense, but, like, semi-narcissistic in that sense, like,
Yeah.
not a narcissist, but someone who's, like, super self-absorbed, someone who's, like, super I'm very self-aware. And there's something in the brain called the default mode network, DMN, which, when that's super activated, being very self-aware is highly correlated with a high activity of the default mode network in the brain, and a high activity of the default mode network in the brain is highly correlated with depression. So therefore, there's a high correlation between thinking of yourself and thinking of, or being self-aware of yourself, like being very conscious of yourself, and being depressed, because you're, like, at that point you're kind of your own god, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're your own god, it's kind of difficult to fit yourself in society.
So how do you sort out that balance between reflecting and comparing yourself to the person you were yesterday, and learning from your mistakes and learning from your wins? But how do you balance that with the necessity to not be so self-absorbed to the point where your default mode network is overly active and I guess you fall into a state of kind of perpetual rumination? How do you walk that line? I know it's a kind of a hard question to answer, but what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think there's obviously the line that you mentioned is, like, very fine, and you have to be, you know, flexible in nature to be able to be self-aware, walking the rope in between, the overly self-aware, highly activated default mode network, which leads to depressive symptoms. And then you also have the more, like, highly social but not very self-aware and kind of, low conscientiousness, individual. Those are two kind of polar opposites, and then there's a line in the middle. And I think the best way to go about that, and this is kind of like a working hypothesis, the best way to go about that is to be, hold yourself to a standard that you want to see from yourself in both categories, right? So you're holding yourself to some standard, which is giving you holding yourself to a standard in general is like, okay, that's a conscientious trait. Like you're not just letting yourself be willy-nilly. So you're holding yourself to a standard, but the standard includes something social, right? Like you don't want to just be like, all right, my standards are, I'm going to the gym and I fall prey to this a lot because this is a lot. I'm explaining myself almost, like I'm walking the line and I'm holding myself to these standards, again, a conscientious trait. And the standard is I'm going to go to the gym today. I'm going to do my work today. I'm going to read today. It's all like about me, And then if you include like, oh, I'm going to talk to a random person today. Oh, I'm going to go to a club meeting today. Oh, I'm going to sit down with my family for dinner today. It's like you're adding in those social aspects. Maybe you're going to, go to some religious service today. You're adding in those like, so you have the ones about yourself and you have the ones about, the other people in like a community aspect. And then you're kind of like on the line, even though you're kind of tiptoeing, like, but both, you're going both ways a little bit, you're still on the line.
So how do you balance those two? Is it, a pretty even split, or do you maybe put a little bit more weight on yourself, a little bit less weight on others, vice versa? How do you sort that out?
I think for the past year, I've put a lot more weight on myself, which is a good thing and a bad thing. You have a good sense of who you are when you put a lot of weight on yourself, and like again, like comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, and continuing to climb up that ladder. But I think there is something to be said for improving socially, and that's kind of my next steps personally, where I want to go. So I wouldn't say that I have that all figured out, but I think, like I said earlier, you have to take from both kind of philosophies and continue walking on that line in a somewhat linear fashion. You don't want to like you don't want to like walk on that line and then the line starts going like exponentially up and you have to like climb it, because that's hard. That's hard to do, like to climb both sides of those things. You kind of want to just like walk the line to a point where you can actually keep walking it. You're not just going to fall off. So it's just like the small micro steps that we talked about earlier, that a lot of people talk about, that's like pulled from, Jordan Peterson or whatever, whoever you want to say. I mean, it's everyone, but it's not everyone in the world, because everyone in the world, most people are, not improving. So, it's the people who want you to improve. They all talk about, the micro improvements, the small stuff that will, help you to, see the light of day a little bit brighter the next day than it is today. And there's something to be said for just not making sure the line you're walking doesn't go up a crazy hill, like a crazy steep, slope. You just want to make it linear. And the balance between the social and the self-absorbed stuff needs to be, again, like I said, it needs to be in the middle, because if it's swayed to one side, I think it can be swayed for a period of time to one side or the other, like like monk mode. Like like that's when the line is literally exponential and it's only about yourself, and that's fine. But there needs to be a point where monk mode becomes the opposite, and that is like, I don't know, like social influencer, and it's like, all right, like now I'm improving and I'm talking to people that I never thought I would talk to, and I think that's a really important thing, because a lot of, and myself included, I didn't really think about that when I was like thinking about like self-improvement, so I think it's an important thing that I'm starting to grapple with, and I appreciated the question.
Yeah, you brought up the point about the metaphor of like the exponential line versus kind of steady growth. Can you talk about that a little bit more? I guess just for some clarification, what do you mean exactly by the differences between like the exponential incremental steps as opposed to the more linear steady growth?
I mean that sometimes when you do too good a job, maybe not too good a job, but let's say you were holding off on something, right? And then you're like, all right, like I'll do it the next day. You keep pushing it away, you push it away, keep pushing it away, right? And then you finally do this thing, but you do it like to like the most beautiful, like full extent. And then you start to question yourself, why didn't I do it earlier? Like, what's wrong with me? and then you kind of revert back to your old ways. Like, oh, well, I'm such an idiot. I should have done this way earlier. And then you just end up kind of doing what you did before because you were like, you're kind of thinking to yourself, like, it's like if you're like trying to clean your room. I mean, this is like Jordan Peterson talk, but like, it's anyone can clean their room. So
Yeah.
like, and it's like, all right, you don't clean your room I just did like yesterday. It looks great in here. And, you don't do it. You don't do it for like 3 months. Okay. And then one day you're like, I've had enough of this. I'm just going to clean it. And it looks so beautiful. And then you're like, wait, why didn't I do this for 3 months? Like I had 3 months to do this and I just did it all in one step. That's like the absolute like exponential. Like you just did it. Like you just like it's 0 to 100. And the line between you, the line you would draw between 0 and 100 is just like that. It's just like exponential growth type of thing. And a steady growth would be like, okay, so the room is a mess and you're going to pick up the t-shirt and you put it away and whatnot. And it's just a much more stable line of representation of improvement. Like there's something to be said for an exponential improvement. Like, okay, someone who just started going to the gym and 3 months later, they look amazing. Like there's something to be said for that. But there's a higher chance of you reverting back to your old ways.
It's interesting that we're having this conversation a couple weeks before New Year's because this is the biggest time of year for stuff like this. The guy who January 1st is in the gym. January 21st he's in the gym, and then February rolls around, March rolls around, and he's not.
Yeah,
I think that's probably the most universal example of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I remember like 3 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was in the gym. I think I was junior in high school, and I met this guy who it was in January. And he was like, "Oh, you one of the New Year's kids?" And I was like, "No, I've been here since September." That's when I started going to the gym, I guess. Although I started going to the gym like sophomore year of high school, I guess. But I was like, "I've been here since at least September." And he was like, "Oh, good. I don't want to see you drop out like the rest of the kids." And I just watch. I look around and like there's people I know, and I just watch as they all just stop going. And it's like it's hilarious because then by the time I guess, well, a little before now, by the time like November and like September and October, no one's there. It's like nobody's there. Especially I go in the morning, which I'm sure you might want to talk about. But I go 6 in the morning or whatnot, and it's like the only people there are the most absolutely disciplined people that you could find because who else wants to wake up at 6 in the morning to go lift, do some. Do a movement with their forearm, like this move their forearm in an upward trajectory to work their bicep muscle, right? Like people want to be sleeping, right? So you only find the most disciplined people, and even the people who start at New Year's aren't going to go at like 6 in the morning. So personally, I haven't really seen too many of them, but again, when I was a junior in high school, I did see a lot when I used to go in the afternoon. So I saw a lot of people who would kind of just drop out. You never saw them before. 2 weeks later, you never see him again. So,
yeah. So first of all, how I know we've talked about this a couple times, but I still, how are you able to go so early? Like you talk about that. How did you build this habit of going to the gym at 6 in the morning?
Well, to be honest, I can give you the bullshit answer, and then I can give you like I can give you like the hard work, discipline, bullshit. And that's the bullshit answer though. And then I can give
What's
you
the real? I want the real answer.
well, I don't think I ever told you this one. Honestly, this is true. And being back home actually has connected me back with this. And I'm gonna make another point, which I mentioned to you a few weeks ago, like when I last saw you at school. But I really enjoy waking up in the morning. Like I do. I mean, and that's not my bullshit. That's the real answer. That's not my bullshit answer. I enjoy walking in the morning. I enjoy seeing the sun rise. That's some Andrew Huberman stuff, right? Sunlight, sunrise. Although again, it's not for I never got into it for the science or for like the hard work. It was just I liked it. I just enjoyed it. Like I'm as an early person. Although I do get a lot of my heavy work done at night usually, I enjoy waking up in the morning. So there's a kind of a paradox there. But anyway, and I'm usually not great like midday. It was the sun in my once.
Yeah, circadian rhythm.
Yeah, but that's still okay.
It's all right, man.
Okay. Anyway.
Millions of listeners will be judging you. No,
Millions.
it's funny you bring that up because I was just talking to one of my friends, and he was saying he's struggled to find driven people at the college that he's at, and I was like, well, what if? No, I was just sort of joking around, but I mean, at the same time, I was a little bit serious. I was like, well, what if you just went to the gym at 6 a.m.? It's interesting that you mentioned like how when you put yourself in a position where you're doing like the most ludicrous disciplined thing in the world, you're gonna meet people just like you. What do
Mhm.
you talk about the? Have you met anybody? What are the people like who are in the gym at that hour?
I know a few people. And this is what I'm going to work on, I guess, next semester. Um, but I do want to be more open, more openly social with the people that go to the gym that early. Um, but I know a few people, and they're all very, very hardworking. Um, although, some of them are very physically hardworking, but not all of them are necessarily academically smart or like not,
Mm.
academically hardworking. It's not all like, the most disciplined. It's not all. They're all very disciplined for waking up in the morning that early. Like you have to be, all right. But it's not all for what you might expect. It's like, okay, this person might just want to go to the gym right away because he like really, maybe he's really insecure about a lot of people judging him in the gym later. I don't know, but
Mm.
so he's not. But I think in general, and I know a few other people who I just a lot of, and I'm gonna actually let me just judge them. Let me judge them based on their apparel. Like I have never seen more like religious t-shirts than when I go to the gym in the morning. So like I see, and I kind of have somewhat of, it's not religious, but it's like a hard work, God's work type of shirt. That's what I wear in the gym. But I see, like, I think half the guys, I don't think any of the girls really, half the guys that I see in they all have like some type of religious, like God type of shirt. And I'm like, that's interesting because when I used to go in the afternoon, I didn't see any religious stuff. And I think I mean, most of like the university, I'd say, is not very religious, although I guess Binghamton is very Jewish, but I think in an religious as in like devout to God, I wouldn't say it's very, much so at all. Um, and I'm not saying I am either necessarily. That's an interesting topic, but
Well, it's an interesting pattern. Like, I wonder why that is. Just
I think that they're more like less about their own pleasure and they're more about like the long term goal and sacrifice in the moment for goal in the mid to long term. It's like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym in the morning because I have my class at 9 in the morning and I really have to study all day, and I maybe go to religious services at night, and I wake up again in the morning and I do it again because that's a proper sacrifice for my own understanding of my future. My own understanding of the betterment of my future self is to know that if I sacrifice today, I will reap the benefits tomorrow,
mm,
or reap the benefits in 3 years. you know,
yeah.
it, it could be 3 years. This for the kid, just for the kid listening who's never gone to the gym before in their life. Just know that it might take you 5 years to see any. I mean, not actually, but it literally could take you 5 years to see like any noticeable result if you happen to get hurt. Obviously, it won't take 5 years for any noticeable result, but if you happen to like get hurt or something or whatnot, but it'll take you at least, I'd say, 6 months to see like real noticeable results.
It might take you 5 years before you're happy with the way your body looks. Like, that is
Mm,
possible.
I agree.
That's a reality that a lot of people
It could
have in the
actually,
gym.
you could actually never be happy with how your body looks
I was
if
about to say, yeah.
if you're the type of person who, as you approach, oh, I'm like quoting Jordan Peterson now, but as you approach heaven, heaven recedes further, and if heaven in some kind of narcissistic sense is your own body's glory, as you approach it, it recedes further, so it's hard to really obtain that goal, but it's still noble to chase it, obviously, because it's a hard thing to do, and chasing hard things is much more noble than chasing easy things. And chasing easy, impulsive, and self-gratifying things. Well, short-term self-gratifying things is not the way you should really want to go, unless you want to end up aimless and distraught. So
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was wondering is you mentioned that a lot of the people, even though they're in the gym at 6 a.m., their discipline might not carry over to other avenues of life. Why do you think that is? And why do people struggle to make I guess, the discipline in one area carry over to a different endeavor?
I think that people hyper focus on things. Well, let me change that. I know that I hyper focus on things. So I'm making the by proxy, since I'm a human, I'm assuming, which isn't very good to do, but I'm kind of broadening that everyone hyper focuses on things. Obviously, that's kind of a joke because I just know everyone. It's human nature to like, you have a goal, you want to go achieve it, right? So if someone's goal initially is okay, like I'm a bum, I'm gonna like improve my body, then why would they focus on school? It's not part of their criteria. Like if it's not part of your criteria, then why would you ever think of improving it, right? So like initially in the gym, that was my goal, right? Like when I was a high schooler, I went to the gym and that's the only improvement that I made in my whole being. It was only the physical, right? Uh, I didn't, venture onto really intellectual growth until maybe senior year of high school. And the intellectual stuff kind of came second once I was like, all right, I'm gonna start to improve the way I think, because at this point I was kind of corrupted by the fresh and fits of the world. And so once I decided to improve that stuff, I was like, all right, so the gym isn't the only goal anymore, so let's go buy a book. And then I bought a book. And then it's like, all right, I'm gonna go to the gym today, I'm gonna do my homework, and then I'm gonna read this book, and then I'm gonna go to sleep and go to the gym. It's like, all right, now you have the gym and a book. And then the next thing to do is maybe actually study for your tests. It's like, all right, now I have a gym, I have my studying, and I have a book. It's like, all right, maybe the next thing is go talk to someone you don't know. So now you have the gym, you have studying, you have a discussion with somebody else, and you have a book, and then you go to sleep. It's like you keep again. It goes back to the micro improvement stuff. You keep adding those things on, and it's like that's how you improve. You have to consciously be aware of what you want to improve. So if these people are just there to improve their body and it happens to fit in their schedule and they happen to enjoy the morning, they might not always be disciplined. But I say again, like with the whole religious thing, I think that is a key marker in someone's like discipline, to be honest. And well, maybe not a key. I think it's people. Usually, people who are more religious are more, I'd say, conscientious in some way, in some real way, in some deeper.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up. I was just reading a study in the psych textbook about people who were in religious areas were actually more likely to donate and have donated to charity even when they had less money.
Mhm.
So it's clear that just the apparent presence of a higher power motivates people to do things that are like, I guess, intuitively morally correct. So there is some research to support what you're saying,
Yeah,
at least in some sense.
yeah, and I think you know, people who don't see themselves as like the highest power, they see something else above them, no matter what that is, if it's a god or if it's a something, they will serve that thing more than they serve themselves. So like their like instant gratification might dissipate because God says not to do that stuff. And I've kind of been really interested in this lately, kind of because I'm really excited to go to Jordan Peterson's thing, which we're going to together. His lecture, not his thing. We're going to his lecture together, but um, but like I've been watching him a lot talk about this stuff, and it's really interesting me now because I am not really religious much, but Jordan Peterson talks about you know his belief in God is that he acts as if God exists. It's not really he doesn't. I don't. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting his words, but I don't think he's ever really said that he outright believes in God in like the man floating in sky sense. I think he believes in it in his own spiritual sense, as it kind of he or whatever kind of keeps him or people in general in line. So if you act in a good line, so if you act as if God exists, then you're only making good moral choices on the behalf of your community and social and yourself, but yourself, your community, and your social, like, uh your social situation, right? So it's hard to explain. Obviously, it's a complex.
I'm pretty sure he defined it on one of the podcasts as the spirit that guides you when you make moral decisions,
Mm.
which is, I mean, I agree. I haven't thought about. I mean, the question of what is God or does God exist is
I think it's kind of higher than our pay grade currently.
it's yeah. I mean, I haven't thought about it enough, but what I will say is that it is an interesting conception to think about.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've covered self-improvement broadly and your journey. You want to talk about why start a YouTube channel?
Well, I think well, first of all, as I'm sure you can already tell, I like to talk. And I mean, I don't know how 35 minutes has gone by. I have no idea how that's happened. I can tell you right now, it has felt like 5 minutes. And I think that's the most important thing. And when you're picking like a vocation, when you're picking a job, it's like, all right, what do you want to do? What can you do? Where you are doing something actively and time is passing by and you don't really feel like time is passing by much at all. It's like, well, for me, it's speaking. I just love to speak. I literally just love to speak. I mean, in person, I also speak a lot. And it's something that I was like, okay, I can just do some YouTube videos. And I haven't been as consistent as I would like, which is a question that kind of runs deeper than just why haven't I been consistent. But it's just something to let other people know. It's kind of like letting other people in on some kind of secret, but it's not really a secret because it's just helping them improve themselves. It's just like, all right, this is what's going on in some capacity in some little sector of society or sector of my mind or sector of your mind potentially. And if you don't like it, which is highly probable, then we can help fix that and just watch this video and see if it helps you. And it's like, I might go on and on and on about some random thing for like 10 minutes because I kind of just talk and I have a hard time with directions. But, you know, it's just a way to let other people know about things that I find that are highly interesting. And that's just why I do it. And I like to talk. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. So you bring up the point about it seems like you're saying when you're talking, you're just talking to a camera, you're talking about what's on your mind, you're in a flow state. And I was just watching the Hamza video that we were talking about, and he said one of the best ways that you can find your purpose in life is to figure out where you achieve a flow state.
I think
What is it?
I
Go
think
ahead.
that's the exact video I think that I watched as well. And it was after I started doing it, I believe. And I was like, man, or maybe it was right before. I don't remember. But I was like, man, like I really feel that way. And it's like when I'm having a deep conversation with somebody, the time flies. Like it's insane. Like it flies. And it's like not because I'm so invested in their emotional state per se. It's because my mind is working at a rate that isn't usual because it's so complex when you try to like even this podcast is complex, coming at it from like all different angles and sides. It's very multi-dimensional, but it's also multi-directional in the sense where like you have to approach questions from multiple angles to get the correct viewpoint of what you actually think, and it's hard to do that, and it's something I'm working at. But and also when you're trying to help somebody else, and it's just interesting to think about those things, and then display them through your words to somebody else, all at one time, while trying to limit, the points where you're not really saying anything. I just really enjoyed all that, and I forgot, I completely forgot what you were saying. Oh, the willpower video, right? Yeah. Why I just love like solving problems that are kind of like creatively intellectual, like you think about like trait openness, and it kind of divides into the subsets of, artistic creativity and, intellectual ideas, right? And I find myself in the intellectual ideas side of openness a lot, just kind of like ruminating, you know, and it's really fun. And it's to me, it's just a great time. And that's really why I think that I find a flow state in it, because I just search all the depths of my knowledge to find some words to throw out for some situation. And it's highly appealing and interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. It it's such an interesting balance of, to do the kind of talking that you're doing because, on the one hand, you have to think, first of all, you have to really search within yourself to kind of arrive at the most precise, not only viewpoint, but then you have how you articulate it, which is another interesting balance because you have to balance, well, on the one hand, you have to say it in precise terminology. You have to, try to get it right, try to use the right words for what you're thinking. But then on the other hand, you have to use words that are understandable to, well, I guess it depends on your target audience, but you have to try to use words that are understandable to the everyday person.
Yeah.
So it's, you're balancing a lot. I mean, you want to talk about, is it a tough skill to develop? I mean, have you seen improvement? Have you seen challenges as you, because what you're doing is hard. You're sitting in front of a camera for 20 to 30 minutes just talking. You don't have you don't have me giving you questions. You
You
just
know,
have you and
I
the camera. Like,
yeah,
is that hard? That must be really difficult. How are you able to do that?
I really, I think of myself like even though talking like this, although this is kind of easy to me, because like you're like you said, you're like handing me questions. It's like, it's just fun. And it's like, whatnot. I really think of myself like, I know it's kind of, you know, it's not true, but I learned about, like how your neurons connect when you form, when you're doing any new activity, right? You're gonna grow, new neurons, and how they kind of connect and grow based on what you're orienting yourself towards. And it's like the more that I let my mind kind of run wild on like videos like that and kind of just think and talk, the more that my mind becomes interconnected in my head, just like the more that I envision my neurons interconnecting, and like how I can articulate myself in a better fashion quicker every time that I do it. And I think it's a noble skill to have, because then you could like you can markedly impress people very quickly if you can like connect all these dots. And I think one of them, I don't know, I don't think I've ever heard this, one of the markers in my opinion of intelligence is how fast you can get from point A to point B, like point A to point B, not that they're connected though, like interconnecting all these other concepts, like to get from point A to point B, like kind of having the connectivity of your knowledge very strong. I think that's like a marker of intelligence. And I don't know. I think it's hard. When I do my videos, I don't have notes, which I think I might change. But like I literally just sit there and I talk, and I have critiques because I kind of just speak for like 30 minutes, and like it could get kind of boring, and you're just looking at me for 30 minutes. It's like, all right, well, this guy hasn't done much. He's just talking, about some crazy stuff. And it's like, it's cool, but there's no like, structure to it. And I think I'm going to change that, 'cause I think I do need structure in the videos. But uh, I do enjoy growing the interconnectedness of my brain. And I think that's something that I really find will be helpful in the future. Just being able to, like today, I met this guy in the sauna at the gym, and I didn't know who he was. So I introduced myself, and well, he was reading a book, and I asked him what the book was, and he talked about, it was like a story about some guy who was like, he had Mexican heritage. So he went down to Mexico to like find his family's heritage or something. And along the process, he like went on like a whole like hallucinogenic journey, in Mexico. Some crazy stuff. But we just had a conversation. The book doesn't really matter, but we just had a conversation, and I was able to kind of connect. We bonded over Jordan Peterson, I think, and Jordan Peterson and how social media is kind of bad for kids. But I was able to make the connections between social media, between Jordan Peterson, and between trait openness within the span of like 6 minutes. And he was really impressed. He was thoroughly impressed. He was like, hey, like, you're 19. That's like good on you. I have two kids that are 17 and 21. They could use you. It's like, it helps you to interact with people if you can interconnect point A, again, point A from point B. And I haven't even ever thought of this really. Like, again, like during the competition, like I went from talking about social media and how it's harmful, but I talked about how social media is almost like how newspapers were, 60 years ago. Like if you have it, you're going to grow up with it. You're going to keep reading it. You're going to keep using social media, right? Until someone tells you to stop. Or until you get the wherewithal in your mind to understand to stop. And I connected that to trait openness in terms of people who are searching for new ideas will be more likely to kind of understand that those ideas only sprout when you're not taking in other people's ideas, like the whole idea of taking, like looking within yourself for your own views and like not looking at social media, So I was talking about that, and this guy was like thoroughly impressed. And I'm not boasting at all. I'm just talking about the situation. And the situation was I was able to talk to him in a manner that was like pretty concise about topics that people would call like kind of taboo, self-improvement stuff. But he was really interested in it, and he was like, well, that's like a good thing. Like you're going to do well. And like, it was a good connection to make. And that's what I'm saying. And I kind of went all over the place with the answer. I tend to go all over the place when I speak. It's like I'm just interconnecting different ideas into one idea. And it really, I think, is a marker of intelligence.
Yeah, it's great that you point that out, because I think a lot of people don't typically associate that interconnectedness with the way that they view intelligence. I think a lot of people look at intelligence as, how good you are in whatever math, how good you are with numbers, how good you are with existential topics or philosophies or stuff like that. But
Yeah.
there's less emphasis on weaving everything together into sort of one idea. Like, how can you take certain concepts from each different type of conventional intelligence and bring it all together into one idea. You know what I mean? And it's a good way to view intelligence, and something that I certainly look for in the people that I regard as respectable thinkers.
Yeah, like just one last point about it. I learned about, well, I understood it, but we learned about divergent versus convergent thinking in psychology class, right? And the thing about both of them is that I think the increase in interconnectedness is converging divergent thoughts. So you're converging the thoughts that are divergent into each other to be able to make a point or an idea based off thoughts that are kind of on two separate realms, two separate ends of the spectrum. And I think it shows the range of your mind, the range of your intellectual capacity to do that. And I think it's something that like Jordan Peterson does extremely well. He's extremely well spoken, and it's because like he can go from talking about plates and forks to talking about heaven within the span of 1 minute. And it's like, if you can do that yourself in the span of 20 minutes, you are impressive as hell,
Yeah. I think it also shows your ability to understand underlying concepts, because if you can connect, plates and forks with the pinnacle or with heaven, then you understand the underlying ideas and intuitions that are associated with both of the concepts, and you're kind of bringing them together and wrapping them up into a bow, and it's like, perfect.
Yeah, you're bringing the completely metaphysical into like some type of physical, right? So it's a good thing.
Yeah. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, actually one more thing. So It seems like one of the things that you're describing with this YouTube thing is how you enter a flow state through just talking and letting your thoughts kind of flow. That reminds me, so one of Freud's big contributions and one of the things that he discovered, among others that obviously are not the most widely accepted among the modern psychologists, but one of the things that he was able to discover that is still pretty popular is this concept of free association, where you would just have his clients come in and just talk and just say what's on their mind, and just keep talking and don't really hold anything back. And what he discovered, what there was, that there's something therapeutic about just letting thoughts flow, and just not kind of reducing the filter that you put on the thoughts inside of your head. Do you experience this when you're making a YouTube video, or do you feel like you have to filter it to make it understandable?
You
Talk
know,
about your experiences there. Is there a therapeutic aspect to filming a YouTube video that's like 20 to 30 minutes long?
I would say so. I would say that right now I'm in one of those states where I know as soon as I get up out of this chair and walk out and grab my food for the my lunch, I will feel amazing about myself just because I was sitting here speaking about things that I really find interesting for 45 minutes, 49. Now at this point we're at 50 minutes, and it's like, wow,
How
like
did that happen?
I have no idea how that happened. And it's like, I agree. I think it is very therapeutic. And I've seen this. I've gone to some therapy, although so I, I have mixed reviews. But when I just kind of sit and talk, that's the best. And then, but obviously you want to be challenged in therapy. But anyway, when you make a YouTube video, you know, it's like 30 minutes long. Like my last two videos were like 45 and 30 minutes long, and I literally just sat there and was talking, but I wasn't even talking I was talking to myself. Like it's all about like what I'm trying to improve myself. I'm also trying to help other people do the same thing. So it's like it just really it helps. It's a very mutually beneficial relationship because you know, I'm helping them and they're helping me, and that's it. It's like I remember in my high school biology class, we learned about a mutual beneficial relationship as there's a type of a species of hummingbird in Florida who rest in alligators' mouth, in their mouths, right? They clean their teeth. They clean the alligator's teeth for the alligator, or maybe a crocodile, I forget. But the alligators or crocodiles don't eat the bird because I don't know. I guess they don't want to. I don't know. But they just kind of like they literally just chill like inside the mouth of the alligator or crocodile for a time being, and they clean their teeth. It's like that's how I feel when I'm making the YouTube video. I'm helping other people, but I'm also like cleaning the teeth of the crocodile of myself.
That's nuts, dude. They live in the crocodile's mouth. It's
Well,
okay. It's called
they
an Egyptian plover bird.
they I think, yeah, I think it's a real thing. They take I don't know if they don't live there. I think they just rest there. Like if it's like a really hot day and like the crocodile's like got its mouth open or something, they literally just like clean the teeth for them. It's something like that. And from what I remember, this is like a thought from like 5 years ago, right? And and you know, and to some capacity, that's what I feel like I'm doing with YouTube. Like I'm helping. I feel like I'm helping somebody else out in some capacity, but I'm also helping myself out.
Hmm.
And I get into that flow state where I really feel good about what I'm talking about, what I'm doing, and it's just a really beneficial thing for myself. So yeah, I mean, and I'm gonna have the same feeling after this. So
Awesome. So one thing that I wanted to ask is that some of your videos are about self-improvement topics for men that might be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, especially on the internet. Might be a little taboo. Uh, are you worried that, like well, I guess to take a step back, are you worried about people's opinions there? Does it bother you to, post something where you're talking about an uncomfortable topic, or do you
no,
not give a fuck?
no, I really don't care. Like, well, there's multiple layers to this, right? But like, I told you about like this person who was pushing back on some of my ideas, and like that's cool. Like I put my ideas out there, and if you want to push back on them with me, that's fine. But like I'm not concerned about people having a problem with it, because I think at the heart of it, it's only to help people out. So I don't think they're really gonna be too hypercritical of it. And a lot of people understand, I think, what I'm talking about in some deep sense, even if what I've talked about in some videos is kind of more like on the surface level. And in terms of employers, I really don't care. First of all, if they can't see what I was doing as a 19-year-old was sitting down and trying to help other people's lives, that's exponentially more important than going to a club and hooking up with 5 girls who are absolutely drunk on their ass. So, if they can't, that's what I would say to them. I'd be like, hey, if you have a problem with me at 19 or 20 years old or 21 years old saying that you shouldn't masturbate while the other kids that are 19 and 20 and 21 years old are literally in the club getting with girls who are intoxicated beyond belief, then I don't want to work here. First of all, that's my first point. All right, that's point number one, because it's they have a logic fallacy there. It's like, well, that's it's too inappropriate for our company to be on the internet. It's like, oh, okay. It's like, I'm just trying to help other people. Like, do you not believe in helping other, and also I think I'm going to be personally, I'm going to be self-employed. So I don't care. First of all, I don't care. I'm going to work for myself. But if they have real problem with it, I would tell them, I'd give them, I'd be straight up and be very, very honest. I'd be, hey, like, I was just trying to help myself out, because when I was 14, I had those problems. When I was 13, I had those problems. And if you have a problem with me saying that thing at that time, just trying to help other people, then I would question your own, I'd question your own goodwill in those in that circumstance, And it's like they could respond with, "Well, I don't want this to get out and like it make you look silly." And it's like, "Well, it's not silly. It's important. It's not silly that that pornography has been taking a grip of young boys from the ages of 9 to 12. That's insanity. That's not a silly matter. It's very serious. And if you can't see that I was doing good, substantial, at least I was trying to do good, substantial work with that when I was 19 years old, then I would question your own opinion on the subject."
Yeah, good respect. So, harsh transition. You talked about The Power of Now in one of your videos. I love that book. What did you take from this book? I mean, I read it my sophomore year of high school. I thought it was one of the best books that I've ever read. Talk about that for a bit.
I wish I had it with me. I don't have it. It's up at school. But the only book I brought back, a few books, but
Ooh.
that's one of the books that I brought back. But I don't have The Power of Now with me right now. But one thing that it definitely helped me with was just being grateful for the current moment, because at the end of the day, the future is a figment of our imagination, and the past is our recall of memories to the current moment. But the now is what's actually happening, what we're actually living in. So it's important to be fully there, or at least it's important to be conscious of being there while you're there, being, I guess it would be here because it's now, right? But being in the moment while you're in the moment, and not just perpetually looking to the future, right? You don't want to be planning a trip. I think it was Chris Williamson who said this. You don't want to be like planning a trip to the Dominican Republic, and then you get there, and then the first thought is, "Wow, I want to go there again next year." It's like, well, then you're saying that the only fun is in the journey and not the destination. And there is something to be said about that. All of the happiness you acquire in a given situation is from the journey and not the destination. But you should also be appreciative of the destination once you reach it. And you should be appreciative of the moment you're in once you realize that this moment will never come again, right? And that's kind of the power of the book, because it's the power of now, and the now is just the current moment in which you're existing in. And once you're grateful for that, you have a much higher likelihood of being happy with your life circumstance, considering happiness is just gratitude and agency combined into one overarching concept. It's you have half of happiness in the bag. So yeah.
Yeah. This quote that I just picked up from the internet, from the author: "Nothing has happened in the past. It happened in the now. Nothing will ever happen in the future. It will happen in the now." And I think that quote is just brilliant. I mean,
No, I
it
agree.
goes to show that the things that we do them in the present, and we don't
Mhm.
when our minds are in the future or our minds are in the past, those are both of those time horizons are figments. They are figments of our imagination in this moment, and the only time that we have really to act is this moment.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about there is something to be said about the power of the past, I'd say, because not because of the negative. I mean, there are a lot of, traumatic negative effects that the past could pull on you, but they all did happen in the now, as the quote says. But I'm speaking more in an optimistic reference. The positive memories that you have will play out in your head thousands and thousands and thousands of times and provide you with thousands and thousands and thousands of positive emotions in the current moment, which you wouldn't have had if that other experience hadn't happened, 100,000 hours ago, whenever that thing was, um, you know, however many days ago it was. If that thing didn't happen, then you wouldn't be happy in the moment. So there's something to say about that. But the quote still stands, as in both of those things happened in the now. It was just in their own respective nows, and those nows or that prior now is now past in the truest sense of the word past. It is passed along. It is we have we have ran past it. We have I'm trying to define past without saying past. But we have, you know, moved on from it, and now it is, back behind you, and you're pulling it from your past, and you're making yourself more content with how you are in the moment. Even if you're kind of suffering in the moment, it can kind of ease that, which is something. There's something to be said about that. But again, like I said, the quote still stands because those things happened in the now, just in their own respective now.
It's an interesting balance because you do have to learn from the past, but I think it's on the individual to determine whether they need to be more present or more reflective. So if you need to be more present, then approaching problems with that framework can be very valuable. Understanding that the only moment that you truly have is this one can be, you know, that's a great approach if you're someone who needs to be if you're someone who struggles to be in the moment, like the anecdote that you brought up of the guy who spent spent months planning a trip and organizing it, and then gets to the destination, and he this is, I believe, Chris Williamson was saying that he got to the destination and instantly thought, "What if we were here next year?"
Yeah,
So
that's what I was
as
saying.
soon
Yeah.
as soon as he gets to the destination, he's already thinking about the next destination.
Mhm.
I'd say if you're someone who thinks like that, then yeah, that framework of that the book provides is really powerful. But I will say, if you're the type of person who's super in the moment and kind of loses the vision for the future, which yes, it's a thought, yes, it's a figment of the imagination, but it is one that's worth entertaining. You do need to have a vision for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I mean, yeah, I
regardless of how real it is. So my thought is that it depends who you are. If you're the type of person who's always obsessing over the past and the future, it might be helpful to remember that those are just, yes, they're important, but ultimately they're just things in your mind. They're just thoughts. if you're the person who's super in the now, but might forget about their future vision or what happened in the past, and they forget to learn from the past, or predicate what they do based on the future, then maybe that framework is a little less helpful, and it might be more helpful to spend a little bit more time thinking about where you're going to be in 5 years or where you were
A-
5 years ago.
Absolutely. And I just spent some time writing out a couple ideas because when I was talking about the future, I kind of didn't do it enough justice really there, because there is a lot to be said. And this is kind of divergent of what the book is saying, but the book, it's a good tool of, point of reference. You don't want to just be, it's a great book for a great point of reference, because there are a lot of books looking to the past. There are a lot of books looking to the future, but there are not many books looking at the current moment. So it's very important to read that book, I'd say. But the future is very important as well, because as humans, we are in some true sense like storybook based people. Like, everyone has their own personal fable where like they tell themselves a story about their life and how they overcome triumphs and tribulations and their own hard times and their own suffering to conquer, not even with quote air quotes, just they conquer themselves, and they keep improving, and that goes back to the self-improvement stuff that we talked about in the very beginning, where they keep improving themselves based on kind of the story they tell themselves about themselves, and they want to improve the story, right? So they want to improve themselves. So, but to start improving yourself, you almost need a vision of yourself in the future that you want to get to. So to get to that, you need to take action by improving yourself in the current moment to get to that future goal or future self that you see. And stories are the fundamental, I'd say it's the fundamental stories are the fundamental mark of being human. I mean, you look at like religion. You look at religion. They're so. I mean, it's a confluence of stories that are meant to embolden your sense of personhood by emboldening the spirituality you hold to move toward the greater good, right? Which is God. So it it displays triumphs and failures and all that in religion, and and you look at Greek mythology, it's all stories. You could say it really happened or it didn't really happen. Doesn't matter. No matter what, they're stories. False. Whether you think they're made up or you think they're true and non-fictional or fictional, they're still stories, and they're stories that embolden your sense of human spirit. And I think that is kind of the pinnacle, to be Jordan Peterson-esque, of people like movies. Why do everyone want to go to movies? Because it's a story, and there are two things that people can do when they go to a movie. Two things. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things you can do. You can buy popcorn, you can eat candy, you can go with a girlfriend, you can go with your friends, But in like a deep sense, you can either go to like escape from your life. That's like one option. Or you can go to a movie to see yourself in the movie, to look for a deeper sense of what you should be doing right now in the movie. It's a deep sense of trying to find something that something that connects to your current situation in a movie that you're trying to base that you will eventually base yourself off in some capacity. And it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, that's a really I think it's a very accurate framework to say that the sort of two options that you point out as to what attitude you employ when you go to see a movie, because I've definitely been in both positions. I remember, as a younger kid trying to escape the stresses of well, I guess the stresses that I thought I had related to school or basketball or whatever else it was. I vividly remember watching Suits right before my bar mitzvah. So I viewed that all of those characters as problems as an escape from the thing that I was anxious about.
Mm.
But I've also been in circumstances where I watch movies uh, to try to gain because stories communicate ideas that are so fundamental to the human experience, and you
Yeah,
want to extract those and apply them. So I've been in both.
absolutely,
Go ahead.
absolutely. And I really want to push back, and because I was really into, because obviously I'm a fan of Hamza, and I was really into his idea about like, oh, like stop watching movies, like it doesn't do anything for you. Just intake the self improvement stuff. I really disagree. I mean, I just figured this out. Like last night, I told you before we started recording this that I watched a movie last night, kind of impulsively, which is unlike me to do something very impulsively. It was like it was not structured at all into my day. I just watched a movie randomly, and I saw myself. It was like one of the perfect examples of I saw myself in the movie, and it really helped. It really has helped me today think about the past few months of my life just from one movie. And look, I think you really need to think about what movie you're gonna watch, like what genre, what like what's the storyline. Don't know the whole thing, but like kind of think about what it's about, right? If it's about some type of like improvement journey, that's self-improvement content. You're just watching it in a story form. It's probably better for you to watch it in a story form, than just watch someone tell you, oh, go to the gym, oh, do this, do that. If you watch it in a story form, you're getting the full display. You're getting all the side characters, all the main characters, the settings. They're all there for you to understand and implement to yourself. But if you're watching like Barbie, but like if you're gonna watch something, like I watched something called the movie I watched last night is called American Beauty, and it's kind of, I'm not gonna get into it because I could do a whole hour-long video on this movie, but it's amazing because it's kind of a weird, perverted, and hedonistic movie, but the main character improves on himself, at least in his mind, not really to the external person, but in his mind, he improves on himself, and it shows in the movie that he was in kind of a funk for a long time, and then he got out of it, and he needed something to shake him up to get out of the funk. And I was like, wow, like this applies to me in some other kind of sense, and it applies to a lot of other people in the sense that, like, okay, if you're going through a hard time, like maybe you need something to shake you up, and maybe you need to be the one to be the catalyst to have something shake you up a little bit to then move on and kind of better yourself in a different way. And I know it's very vague, but it was very apparent to me that movies aren't just for like your hedonistic pleasure. I mean, maybe if you're watching like Barbie or something, I don't know, but there's a lot of good that you could take from movies. But then again, like I remember when I was like 2 years ago, I went to see the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I went to go see the movie, and I did not apply any of it to myself. I just sat there and watched it, and like completely forgot about all my problems. So there's a lot of different ideas.
So how can you take the how can what's your advice for people on how they can get the most out of a story? How does someone need to watch a movie or consume a story that allows them to get the most out of it?
I think if you look for yourself in the movie, like if there's a character who, again, in the movie that I watched last night, the main character was going through a bit of a funk for 20 years. That's a long that's a long time. That's a fourth of someone's life, essentially. 20 years, yeah, 80, right? So, and he got out of it in, again, it was kind of a perverse way to get out of a situation. He took a liking for like his daughter's friend, and it was really weird, and it was a really like kind of perverted movie. Like again, it was weird, but the interest he took in her made him realize that he had become a shell of himself from what he had thought he was. And not that I'm saying I become a shell of myself. I think quite the contrary. But there is something to be said for the person who has a self-awareness to realize that they have been doing something wrong and have been thinking that it's correct. And that's where I connected. right? And that was just my example, but you have to look for yourself in the movie. It could be someone who shows God goodness. It could be someone who shows up in the movie for 5 minutes. It could be the ice cream delivery man who like has a crazy line where he says like, something about how he was depressed for 30 years and then he finally realized that he loves making people feel happy. So he decided to like, drive an ice cream truck around and give desserts to little kids. And it's like that's a beautiful line. That's a beautiful thing. And in the context of a story, you see how that affects other people because it's not a first person narrative. It's a third person narrative, right? Kind of where you're switching from different people's perspectives over and over and over. So the ice cream man could be giving ice cream to 20 kids, and all he sees is him handing the ice cream, right? This is the completely hypothetical example. And then the kids go back to where they're eating, and they sit down, and they all enjoy the ice cream, and they have a great time, and they all have one of the best nights of their lives, okay, up to this point. And it's all because, or in part because, this ice cream man had to give them ice cream. And it's like, well, that's a beautiful perspective. And I just thought of that all, but it's a cool way to look at stories, I'd say.
Yeah, I just watched the movie 12 Angry Men a couple days ago. You need to watch this movie. You would really like it. Basically, what happens is it's about these 12 guys who are on a jury, and they've been assigned this case where this guy has been accused of murder, and if they find him guilty, he's going to be sent to the electric chair. And basically, you see these 12 jurors. 11 of the jurors are irrationally convinced that this guy is guilty. And basically the story is about this one juror who's like, maybe he's guilty, but I don't know. Maybe I think we should think about this a little bit more before we just sentence someone to death.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole story is just about this one juror who ultimately, spoiler alert, convinces the other 11 jurors that the guy is not guilty. And basically the moral of the story, well, there are a lot of a lot of lessons that you can take from the story, but one of the things that I've been thinking about is like, well, for one, what's something that I am too lazy to reconsider? Because that was the problem with a lot of the jurors, was that they were so convinced that this guy was guilty that they didn't even, I mean, well, a lot of it was because they were too lazy to actually like thoroughly review the case. They just wanted to leave, but which was part of it. But they're so convinced that this guy committed the crime that they just didn't have they didn't have the balls, they didn't have the discipline to just actually devote some time to looking at the evidence and giving this guy thorough consideration and, inquiring into, did this guy actually do it? And it makes me wonder, it's like, well, because you say, where do you see yourself in the story? To me, I see myself in the fact that what haven't I been considering? What are the things that I've just blindly assumed are true? Where can I be more open-minded? Where do I need to consider, maybe we should go this direction, even though I've been so convinced that this is the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm saying. I had the same, almost our ideas in the movie, in our respective movies that we watched, kind of overlapped, because you're saying, what can I be more open-minded about, and what I was saying was, what have I been doing, which is leading me to the path of least resistance, but also the path which is making me so comfortable that I'm kind of getting sterilized within the comfort. And it's both of them question our current ideas to try to make something more of ourselves. And I think that's kind of the root of what movies can do. So
great. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on mindfulness and meditation.
I think meditation and mindfulness are very important. I think it's very apparent in the book, The Power of Now, that it's important based on just connecting with the current moment. I also think it's great for anti-anxiety, anything anti-anxiety, if you just sit and breathe properly for like a minute or two and just sit like with your eyes closed for a minute or two and reflect, or not even reflect, not even think, just let like your senses, like honestly, I think the best form of meditation is where you just, there's two forms that I really like, and I forget the names, but where one would be where you just close your eyes and you sit still and you let your senses do all the work, all the senses, but the senses that aren't your vision senses, because your, what's the statistic? I think it's four. I think your vision is 40% of your brain's capacity. So if you're shutting off 40% of your brain's capacity to do other work, not to do nothing, and then you have this other 60% of your brain that usually isn't worked as much to work full time. It's very interesting, just from a neuroscience perspective, it's interesting. And that's why I even was interested in studying neuroscience in the first place, because of mindfulness, which is, that's not the stereotypical neuroscience major's reason for studying neuroscience. I would say usually the reason is I'm going to go to med school, but but although I think I've switched to psychology now, but it was the reason, and I think the reason why I switched actually was because I realized that most of these kids didn't actually care. Most of these kids were like just in it for like the doctorate, and I kind of got sucked into that, where I like expected to go to medical school. I was like, I'm not going to medical school, so I decided to just do psychology instead, which is maybe a flaw in like, well, I could just be my own person, but at the same time, I felt like psychology is kind of more myself anyway. Then the other form of meditation would be eyes open but staring directly at something for a long point, a long continuously long amount of time, right? So if you're sitting by a lake and you're watching, I did this one time. I was watching exactly where the sun shined on the lake without failure. I just watched the exact point on which the sun was shining on the lake for like 20 minutes flat, like just staring at the water for 20 minutes. And then once you take your eyes off of that location, it's like your eyes can finally rotate again, because they've been straight. And it's really interesting how you feel like there's more to see now, because you've only been staring at one thing. You go from only having one option to having an innumerable amount of options to look at, and it's a really cool thing. So I think those two are the most interesting forms of mindfulness that I've come across. Although I have not nearly reached what I want to reach. I would like to one day study with some people who are very into it, but I think on my own, that's kind of where I'm going to sit for now.
So you have one where you basically just let everything happen and you surrender to the current moment with your eyes closed. And then you have the other philosophy, which is intense focus,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So it'd be intense focus. And usually what I found with the intense focus, my mind would work a lot more, right? Because you have the 40% of your brain, the visual system, which is set on one thing, but it's working completely. And then my mind would be like working a lot, like they're like making connections between. One time I stared directly at like a red tree. So there was a sea of green trees, and there was one red tree. And I just sat there and I stared at it for like 20 minutes. And then immediately afterwards, I wrote a poem about the tree, because I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So,
Mm.
in the
So
other,
on the one hand, you have so there's one form of meditation where you're training your mind to be as present as possible and lock in on one particular spot. I actually have an interesting story about that in a second, but and then the other hand, this is another philosophy that I've really picked up on, which is where you just succumb to the moment, and so you can either train focus or you can just train acceptance, which are two concepts that are extremely powerful in life.
yeah,
If you want to achieve things, you got to be focused on the moment, but you also need to accept the moment
mm-hmm.
and use that to move forth. But quick story in terms of the focusing on a particular point. There's a baseball player named Michael Conforto.
I know him.
You know, Yeah, so he has this routine where, in college, he would draw smiley faces on his bat, and before each at bat, he would look at the smiley face and just lock. He would, I think it was might have been before each pitch, or maybe it was before each at bat. I don't recall, but he had this routine where, to get his mind to kind of calm down and be present and lock in on the moment, kind of ignore all the distractions, people in the crowd, coaches, players in the dugout. He would just look directly at the smiley face for like 2 seconds, and then he would step up to the plate.
Yeah. That's kind of like the just focusing on that one visual sight, right? So that's a
Mhm.
cool thing.
Yeah. So is that? I feel like I cut you off. Did you have anything else to add in terms of mindfulness?
No. I think
Okay.
it's something that I've actually kind of gotten away from in the recent months. I think that it's interesting. I feel myself getting I get really into that stuff in the summer. In the winter, I feel more in the winter, I'm more oriented toward like the intellectual properties, which is interesting because I think they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. I think intellectual stuff is in one category, and mindfulness is, I think, is the opposite. Let's say you're clearing your mind versus you're filling your mind, right? It's like you're eating versus
Mm.
you're fasting, and it's kind of an interesting concept. And I don't know why well, it almost goes back to the most true sense of when in winter you want to eat as much as possible because because it's not likely that the plants are going to grow. And I feel that in my mind. In my mind, I in the summer I prefer to fast, and I prefer to do some mindfulness work a lot of the time. In the winter, I prefer to read. I prefer to learn a lot more than in the summertime. So I haven't been doing it as much in the past few months, but I'll definitely get back to it once the weather starts to come back around, I'd say.
Do you think it's the weather, or do you think it's just the turn of the school year? Because during the winter you have way more. You're forced to kind of fill your mind, whereas over the summer you're given this space to clear your mind.
I think it's both, right? Like I'm going away tomorrow on vacation, and it'll be to a nice tropical location, and I'm happy to go. And I have multiple plans. And this is not the typical vacation, right? I'm gonna wake up at 5 in the morning. I'm gonna watch the sunrise, and I'm gonna sit there and meditate for like an hour. Again, I don't usually do this. I don't usually do that in the winter, but you know what? It's because I like to do it outside. I don't like to do it indoors. That's why.
Mm.
So especially where we are in Binghamton and in New York in general, it's tough. So in the winter, and I
Yeah,
actually
you
do.
gotta.
I really enjoy the winter. Like I don't. I think I'm actually gonna move somewhere when I'm older to a place that still has winter. I'm not gonna move to like LA. I don't think. I think I actually prefer seasons, and although I don't prefer New York. So, but that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to ask you about was, you're one of the least impulsive and most disciplined people that I know. How can people develop their willpower?
Well, I think a good start is watching that guide, the Hamza one that we were talking about earlier.
Link
But,
in the show notes.
but you know, hmm, I think you have again. It goes back to the self improvement, like micro change stuff. You have to orient yourself toward things that are going to improve your situation over the long haul, and not just things that are going to improve your situation tonight.
One of my favorite quotes from this is someone on Chris Williamson's podcast said, "All of self-improvement is hard decisions now, easy life later."
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what it comes back to. So I think it's pretty straightforward with that, in terms of willpower, right? It's like, all right, it's hard decision now and easy decision later. Or easy life later, rather. So that's kind of how it goes back to, and the impulsiveness, it's the same thing. It's like, look, like you have a decision to make. Are you going to make the decision which benefits you right now? What you're and it by the way, it's probably not what your conscious mind wants to do. It's what your subconscious mind is trying to get you to do. It's like you're listening to the worst part of yourself in this moment, um, rather than listening to the higher part of yourself to have a higher experience in the future. And we talked about the future earlier in terms of it's a figment of your imagination, but sometimes your imagination is even more real than reality. I mean, it's hard, but sometimes your what you can become is more real than what you are currently. And it's like you have to kind of give into that, you know?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because to go back to Freud, Freud has this idea of the id being, the animalistic, aggressive, sexual impulses, and then
Mhm.
you have the superego, which is, your value system, your ideas of what you want to be, the more rational side of you. And basically, his thing was that the ego, which is, your conscious mind, mediates the conflict between your animalistic impulses uh, and your superego. So that's your value system and your ideas of what you want to be. So
Hmm.
it's interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk about, I guess, your ability to rely on your superego as opposed to the id, which is the id again, representing the animalistic desires and impulses. But that's more of a side point. I wanted to make one pattern that I'm noticing in a lot of your answers is this idea of micro improvements, so
Mhm.
small steps. To bring things back to Jordan Peterson, uh, he said this quote has just stuck with me for months, but he said this on a podcast. I've never seen someone not progress if they make the task small enough.
Yeah,
That was the quote.
yeah.
So, I mean, the application of that, because I mean, one of the things that we were going to talk about was how self improvement is often puts you in a loop of mental masturbation, so to speak, where you're just imagining yourself taking all these steps, but you never actually get anything done. I mean, to me, that quote is kind of an escape from that uh, fantasizing, and it gives you such a clear step that you can take towards actually going out and bettering your life. Because what he's saying is, you just shrink the task, just make it an extremely small doable thing, get clear on what needs to be done, and just make it small. It can be something so simple as to just open your laptop. You might not be able to write the essay now, you might, you know hate the material so much, and it might seem like such a daunting task, but can you open the computer? Can you
Yeah,
turn it on? Can
yeah.
you go onto Google Drive or
Mhm.
Brightspace or whatever the fuck we use? You can do that. You
Yeah.
can you can write one, then you write a word, then you write a
Mhm. Yeah.
sentence,
Mhm.
and then you write
Exactly.
another sentence, and then oftentimes it'll start building on top of each other, which that kind of relates to another idea I've had, especially in the context of willpower. And now I'm sort of just this is not something that has much research behind it. This is just sort of me talking from experience, but a lot of times, something that I've noticed about discipline is that it the hardest thing might be the inertia at the beginning.
Hmm.
So when I'm picking up a new habit, you know how they say like it takes 21 days to form a habit? It's like the hardest part is oftentimes is getting the ball rolling at the beginning. Is just starting,
Yeah.
building up the momentum at the beginning. It's like if you had a graph where on the y-axis you have difficulty, and then on the x-axis you have output. It At the very beginning, it's going straight up. It's just very difficult. There's an extreme level of difficulty for an extremely small output. But the more you just try to uh, groove the habit, the more the level of difficulty decreases and the output increases for each unit of difficulty. And then eventually, and I think you can relate to this, because I'm sure at the very beginning, like, 6 a.m. workouts might not have been that easy. Or studying, I've seen the way you studying for like 15 hours for an orgo test was probably not that easy at the beginning, but the more you do it, just starting the studying, getting the ball rolling, that. that might be the hardest part. But then once you get into the groove, you're able to do a lot of studying for a very small level of difficulty, and you kind of create leverage that's related to discipline. What do you think of that idea?
I love it. I actually, while you were describing that, I drew out your graph.
Perfect.
I don't need to show it, but we can. But I basically, on the y-axis we had difficulty, and on the x we had the output, and I had the line go straight up. So we have high difficulty, and the output was literally 0 for the first. My graph didn't include any time frame, but we could say we have 6 weeks here, and then once we're past like 6 weeks, the difficulty is actually staying kind of stagnant because it's like still hard, but we're getting output out of it, and eventually at like 12 weeks, there's almost no more difficulty because it just keeps going down because you understand how to do it, and that again goes back to my whole idea of the increase in the interconnectedness of the brain through the exposure therapy of it, right? So whatever you're doing, you're increasing the connectedness of your brain in the sense of being able to conquer that task, and thus the difficulty goes down because it's like training a muscle, right? It's like, all right, like the bicep curls at 20 pounds aren't as hard anymore because we've done them for so long. So now we're going to 25 and then 30 and 35 because then you need more stimulus to add any type of growth or any type of real change. You need a higher stimuli, right? And it's what's what we see with the difficulty in the output. If you're doing the same thing, right? Initially it's difficult, right? But then as time goes on and you understand how to do it, then the output increases while the difficulty completely decreases. And that was a great point. And
Yeah, and I just want to clarify. I mean, obviously, it's not always true, right? Yeah, because you bring up the gym, like obviously, you're going to see your first your first couple weeks of training, you'll see more progress than you will 6 years. 6 years in, it's going to take a lot longer to put on 5 more pounds to your bench than it did in the first month. But my point was more so like habits. Like in order to build a habit, it's very, very, very hard at the beginning to get the ball rolling. And the ball might even roll back. Like sometimes you start going to the gym for a week and then you're like, can't do this anymore. But then you
yeah,
keep trying and eventually you push past that, that first increment where the difficulty is super high and the output is extremely low, but you get past that point, you keep pushing. Eventually, I mean, for the things that I've been most disciplined in, eventually I get to a point where it'd be harder for me to stop because I can't like live without these certain things. Like I can't live without the gym at this point.
absolutely, that's exactly how I feel. And it's tough when things force you to stop, things that you have become so disciplined in your orientation towards that it's hard to just stop doing them, right? And it and that shows you the power of habits, because I see with a lot of people that I know, the habit of scrolling on like TikTok is almost impossible to break. But you can't blame them for it. It's the same thing as us having a hard time breaking the habit of going to the gym. It is ingrained in our brain, and it is ridiculously hard to change that. Now, before the age of 25, it is much easier to change that because your brain is still developing connections at a rapid rate. So anyone who's listening, do everything you want to do before you're 25. That's a good idea. Not actually, but 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 um, but like I was talking to these guys um, at the gym the other day, and they were different guy, not the guy in the sauna, different guy, different group of guys, and they were all shitting on. Well, they were talking about society, so of course I pitched in, and I've never talked to them before. I've seen them thousands of times. I just don't talk to people. I just don't talk to random people usually in the gym. Which I might start changing actually, because they're all probably very smart and they're all business owners. Like every single one of those guys was a business owner, by the way. And I'm actually quickly going back to your point earlier about the gym at 6 a.m. It is much more apparent at home. the discipline for people going at 6 a.m. than at college. Now, maybe not actually thinking about what I just said, maybe not. But the people who are going at 6, it rises to the pinnacle, right? This is pinnacle stuff. Like in college, you're still improving yourself, you're studying hard, whatnot. But when you're at home and you're an old man and you're going to the gym at 6 a.m, like old men, like 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, these people are very successful. And I'm just like talking to them, they're like really impressed with me. And it's like I should get to know everyone that goes to the gym at 6 a.m. at my home gym. I should know everybody. And it goes back to the point of the people who are kind of having the most success in their, I don't know, in their career are the people who only have time for the gym at 6 a.m. And it's like those are the people that I've found at the home gym. So that was a quick point at just a kind of a tangent. But anyway, so these 5 people are just all talking about like society. I jumped in because they mentioned like divorce and they mentioned social media. So I was like, this is right in my ballpark. And so they were talking about like the younger generation, like our generation, Z, Gen Z, whatever. I don't really associate with Gen Z, but Gen Z. And, they were talking about how everyone is on social media all the time and, no one can talk to people in person anymore. It's all on Tinder and all on TikTok and all on Instagram and whatnot. And I was like, hey guys, like respectfully, like you can't blame them. I mean, because like you can tell them to improve themselves. Obviously that's a good idea, but you can't say they're idiots because what would you have done if you had a phone at 10 years old until you were 20 years old? Like what I actually said to one of the men, I said, hey, like, did you grow up with a newspaper? He was like, yes. I was like, do you still read the newspaper? He was like, yes. I was like, point made. Like case closed. Like, my guy, these kids have had TikTok since they were 10 years old. They're not going to stop. Would you stop reading the newspaper if someone told you, well, not if someone told you it was bad for you, but if no one told you it was bad for you, would you stop reading the newspaper? He said, no. I said, well, someone has to tell these people that it's bad for them. Not that they're inherently bad and therefore they're using TikTok. No, tell them that TikTok is bad for them. And this guy was like, you're so smart. And I was like, that was the easiest point I've ever made in my life.
All right. Well, that's, ladies and gentlemen, Ramsey Brown.